Leszek will be presenting here on topic of zoomorphic animal motifs on archaeological findings. So Leszek, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear Jiří, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I love Prague, so it's wonderful to have the opportunity to present my work in this wonderful city. The title of my talk is Slavic Beasts, the Animal Style in Early Medieval Poland and its Symbolic Significance. And it will be a talk sort of opening the archaeological section of our conference. I must begin with a photograph of one of my all-time archaeological heroes, Professor Jan Żak, an eminent scholar, someone who, like myself, delved into the topics of Scandinavian Slavic interaction. He was quite a prominent figure back in his time, in the 1960s especially. And I'm presenting his photograph and referring to his work because he was actually the scholar who introduced the term animal style to Polish archaeology in connection with the Western Slavic world, Western Slavic art. In 1959, he wrote a paper called Remarks on the Animal Style in the Early Medieval Art in Poland. And Jan Żak, in this article, said that the animal style, at least from the mid-9th century, is no longer a specific form of Scandinavian, Rus, Byzantine, Romanesque, Baltic, Finnish, and Hungarian art, but also Polish. Around the mid-11th century, or perhaps a little earlier, it was adapted from Byzantine, Romanesque, and Rus art by Polish goldsmiths, probably primarily in Silesian and Kuyavian regions. Today, we cannot agree with everything that Żak postulated in this quote, but he was indeed right that the animal style did exist among the Western Slavs. When he wrote his paper in 1959, the corpus of archaeological sources was still relatively small, so one can say that he was somewhat impressionistic or intuitive or visionary, if you like, in his claims. But over the last 60 years, the evidence for the presence of animals in the art of early medieval Poland has exploded. The corpus has grown substantially. Over the last years and months, I have been trying to promote the existence of the animal style, not just animal objects with animals, but actually a style. And I have met with some critique from some scholars saying that, oh, maybe this is not a style because there's just so few of those objects. It's not true. Right now, the count is approximately 300 objects just from Poland, not to mention artifacts in this style in diasporic context, so to say. And if you believe in the existence of, for instance, the Mamen style in Scandinavia, which according to the latest count comprises only 100 objects, then you can indeed speak of the Slavic or the Western Slavic animal style. So I will begin with a quick overview of what we are actually talking about and what kind of objects we are talking about. Essentially, objects with animal motifs can be witnessed among the material culture related to all genders, so to say. They appear on female objects, conventionally female objects, conventionally male objects, on gender-neutral objects as well, belonging to all kinds of categories. I'm not showing you all of them. I just want you to give you an idea, of what this material culture looks like. So in terms of those conventionally female items, these are temple rings of various types, rings and bracelets and pendants and kaptorgas. Then in terms of male or masculine objects or objects associated with what is conventionally seen as the masculine sphere of life, we see them on all kinds of weapons, from swords to spearheads to presumably axes and helmets, to riding equipment, and to knife sheaths or knife sheath fittings. But we also see animals or animal motifs on gender-neutral artifacts. We can see them on clay vessels, on wooden vessels, or partially metal vessels. That is, for instance, items such as this one, a wooden bowl with a plaque representing, or several plaques representing some sort of mythical beasts. We see them in the form of antler and bone tools, and also as figurines. These are all the types of objects where we encounter those animal motifs or animals per se. Now, if you break this down, we come to the realization that there are essentially 4 types of animals that the Western Slavs were experimenting with in their art. And these are the kinds of animals that would have been common among the people of the time, among those agrarian societies. So you have cattle, birds, you have horses, and snakes. These are the most commonly occurring beasts, if you like, in this art. But what does it all mean? Why would people of the time depict these animals? Was there a deeper message behind all of this? Over the last several years, a number of scholars, such as Paweł Szczepanik, Kamil Kajkowski, and myself, we have been trying to decipher some of those ideas. And I will not go into detail here. This is not really the point of this talk. But in terms of some of the ideas that are emerging from this material, especially in connection with knife sheath fittings, Paweł Szczepanik and before him, Ingo Gabriel, have made the suggestion that they might represent the cosmos or the cosmos model, that these images are, in a sense, tripartite, and that they refer to the tripart construction of the universe. And together with Kamil Kajkowski and Zdzisława Ratajczyk, we have also applied a similar model, although a bit more sort of sophisticated, elaborate, because the material is more elaborate, to these zoomorphic spurs from Ciepłe and from Lutomiersk, arguing that they also represent a model of the cosmos, of the Slavic cosmos. Now, all these interpretations are, I think, attractive. They're also plausible, but of course they are not 100% certain. And the problem and the critique that we often receive from those who disagree is that they rely on geographically removed textual sources, on sources that are chronologically younger, and that they rely on folklore, which, as you all know, is a problematic body of material to work with. So I will not go into the specifics of these interpretations and try to propose a more holistic approach to the art of the time. So what if we dismiss textual sources and folklore, and what if we try to interpret archaeology through archaeology, in tracing of and trace patterns and trace certain ideas that recur in the material culture of the time? This is what I will try to do in my talk. Having seen a lot of these finds firsthand in museums, but also in publications, I think it is now possible to try and define the principles of this Western Slavic animal style, or at least a specific variant of this style in Poland in particular. Now, as you could see already, there are 4 core animal species that appear, or types of animals that appear in this style: horses, cattle, birds, and snakes. It is difficult to say which, if any, of these animals were the most prominent. It seems, and we wrote a paper about this with Kamil Kajkowski, that snakes were of particular significance, but this may only represent a certain archaeological status quo. This body of material will grow. So I think we have to be still rather careful with categorical views on the matter. Now, what is emerging from new archaeological finds is that occasionally the style would involve representations of animal hybrids, whereby you would have quadrupeds that look like horses with horns, for instance, or snakes with wings. So sort of crossbreeding, unreal, fantastic types of beasts. Now, another point in discussing the specifics of this style is that it can be either very realistic or it can be very schematic. If you don't understand the chain, the sort of typological development of the style, you will not be able to understand some of the schematic designs. But once you've processed enough of the material, these schematic designs become clearer and clearer. Another aspect of this style is that certain animals tend to be shown in very specific configurations. So horses often appear in the context of birds, whereas snakes often appear in the context of cattle. This seems to be a meaningful motif. And there are also specific poses in which these creatures are represented. One of those poses is the back-looking quadruped. So these creatures seem to be doing something. They seem to be performing something. They seem to have some kind of agency. Now, in comparing this Western Slavic animal style to what is happening in Scandinavia at around the same time, we can see that in the Slavic style, animals are rarely integrated into interlace motifs. They are usually separate from all these beautiful interweaving patterns. But what is clear from all this and more is that the style is visually consistent. It has its own grammar. It follows certain principles. There is a certain repetition or citation, if you like, across different motifs, across different types of categories. Another general observation is that this style appears to occur mainly on high status objects. Predominantly, I would say, on metal. It's rarely seen on organic finds, but it also appears there. So it seems that this was a style commissioned by and presumably intended for the elite. Where this style originally emerged, we don't quite know yet, but it seems from the distribution patterns that Greater Poland is a strong candidate. But again, this may only be the archaeological status quo. There's been a lot of archaeological work going on, obviously, in the heart of the Piast state. So that is perhaps the reason why we have a lot of finds like this. The roots of this style probably run deeper, however, and the Great Moravian connection is an interesting avenue to look into. Now, I'll show you a few examples of how the style works. So, for instance, here you have an array of knife sheath fittings, and I have highlighted using different colors the motifs that recur across this material. So in red, you have some anthropomorphic representations, and some scholars have suggested that these are images of deities. In yellow or gold, you have these snake-like motifs, and in green, you have quadrupeds, whether they be cattle or horses is a matter of interpretation. So you can see how at around the same time, really, different artists represent the same motifs in either very elaborate ways, very realistic, or very schematic. It's sort of like this idea of indexing that you mentioned, that certain things become reduced for some reason that we don't quite understand. Are they trying to conceal some meanings? They don't want to be too specific, perhaps in the face of the coming Christianization. Maybe. Now, here's this example of hybrid beasts on relatively new material. Most of you probably have not seen this object. It's one of the recently discovered finds from Ostrów Lednicki, found through metal detecting. And metal detecting in Poland is slowly becoming a legal and controlled practice, and we can expect that there will be more and more finds like this popping up each year. But what you can see here is a creature that looks like a bird, but if you look closely, in its wings, it actually has two other creatures inscribed into them, two creatures that also look like birds. So it's like a bird with two birds in it, or maybe it's not a bird, maybe it's something else. And on the right-hand side, you can see three different types of items with corresponding motifs. The top part is a stirrup from Denmark, from a place called Vels. of evidently Western Slavic design. The middle piece is a kaptorga from Biskupin, and then down below you can see a cheek piece from Giecz, which all have the same kind of design, and it all seems to portray some sort of unreal, fantastic array of creatures that combine the elements of the physiognomy of snakes and birds and perhaps something else as well. And then there is the idea of a repetitive, repeating, recurring motif, the back-looking quadruped. And you can see the same motif with the horse looking backwards on a knife sheath, on a spur goad, on some of the figurines, on a plate from Caudus, on a recently found axe, and also in one of the graves from an elite burial ground in Pień. This means something. It's some kind of a message. And it's also not a natural position for a horse. Horses don't really do that, as I've been told. Now, all this leads to a theory or an idea expressed several years ago called material citation. And it's a theory invented or put forward by Professor Howard Williams in connection with Viking Age art. But I think this concept of citation works very well with the Western Slavic style. Essentially, according to Professor Williams, this concept of citation involves practices of selection and deployment of artifacts, substances, images, architectures, monuments, and spaces that separately or in combination created mnemonic material references to other things, places, peoples, and times. And this is something that seems to be going on within the animal style in the Slavic area. Here's an example of this visual grammar or citation of motifs. It's not just the knives now, but different categories of artifacts. I don't know why this is in the way, but essentially the green that I've marked here are creatures that seem to be cattle, although they have been variously interpreted. Some have thought about them as,
not better,
but sort of better.
So here? Maybe?
Yeah, let's keep it here. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so some scholars have interpreted these creatures on these temple rings and kaptorgas as either horses or cattle. I would argue that they are all cattle, and I would argue that this temple ring does not show just two, but actually three. And mind the number, the numerology here seems to be significant. And then you can see the gold, in gold color, you can see the snaky motifs, and in red, you can see the anthropomorphic motifs. So there's a citation across these different object categories. Now I cannot go to the next slide. Oh yeah, okay. I mentioned the number 3 because this seems to be, again, a recurring motif. Notice the 3 heads on the temple ring. Notice the 3 heads on this strap distributor. Notice the 3 standing or walking horned creatures on the spur. And again, notice the 3, I would say, cattle on this recently found kaptorga from Lille Karleby in Denmark. There is a conscious repetition of not just the animal type, but also the number of animals that are being represented. Now, I want to show you 2 case studies that I've been trying to work with and trying to decipher. And what I should also say is that in dealing with the animal style, I think it's essential to either really look carefully at the artifacts in museum collections or work with very high quality photographs to pick up all the nuances. And I've been sort of playing with this category of objects, these rectangular kaptorgas. Essentially, each one of them is different, but they seem to have recurring motifs. The number of animals differs, but the recurring motif is that all these animals are always facing the same direction, and they seem to have an additional feature which, from a technological or even artistic point of view, at first glance, doesn't make any sense. And that's the stripe, sort of embracing them or cutting through the ornament. Sometimes the stripe is additionally decorated. sometimes it's blank, sometimes it's not fully visible, but the ornament appears behind the animals. It's what I would like to think. I would like to say that, or think, that this is a representation of a snake that appears in combination with cattle. And I would argue, and bear with me, that this is also something that we can perhaps see in the case of those temple rings. You have 3 cattle heads bound with something that looks or may be interpreted as a snake. Now, what is all this about? And to understand this, we have to, unfortunately, I'm afraid, go back to combining archaeology and texts. And in this particular case, this can be, I hope, a fruitful endeavor. So what are we looking at? What is really going on here? I think that this is what we are looking at. I think that we are looking at a very old motif that appears all around the world in different cultures from antiquity up to the present time. And that is the motif of what is known as milk-suckling snakes. Snakes that attach themselves to cows and they suck them dry, they suck milk. Obviously, snakes don't drink milk. This is a kind of impossible biology. They don't have the capacity to digest, to process milk. Nevertheless, even though this doesn't happen or doesn't really happen in nature, the motif, as I mentioned, appears all around the world. Snakes can be presented in various sources from antiquity to modern times as either creatures that are positive and bringing fertility, or as creatures that have these ambivalent connotations where they steal something from cattle. They can be sent by witches, for example, to absorb these vital powers from quadrupeds such as cattle. Could this myth have existed in the early Middle Ages in the Slavic world, in this part of the world? We don't know, but I have recently come across, in reading a very inspiring paper by Davide Ermacora called The Comparative Milk Suckling Reptile, that there is an account actually from the 9th century, an Islamic or Arabic account by a certain Al-Jahiz, who encountered Slavic slaves in what would now be present-day Iraq. And this is what Al-Jahiz says. According to what castrated and intact Slavs claim, the snake in their countries goes to the cow, it wraps itself around the hind legs to the knees and hocks, and then lifts its head towards her udders with its mouth to reach the nipples. The cow cannot, despite her strength, move. The snake continues to suck the milk. Whenever he sucks, the cow becomes weaker. If she nears the point of death, the snake lets her go. They argue that the cow dies or suffers from a serious illness in the udder that makes it difficult to cure. The snake is greatly attracted to milk. If the vipers find a container of milk without a cover, they dive to drink it and sometimes vomit what they have in their bowels. Serious damage then affects those who drink this milk. Again, this is a geographically removed text. It actually predates the artifacts that we've been looking at. But I think this is a possible explanation to what we may be looking at in the archaeology. There's nothing like that, as far as I know, in the early medieval or medieval corpus of textual sources pertaining to Poland. But of course, we have the fabulous story of the Wawel dragon. There's nothing about milk in the story, but there's the story of a dragon that essentially consumes, absorbs wealth. It eats cattle, it eats prosperity. So in a structural sense, this is a similar idea of absorbing something, stealing something. A myth and an idea that would have resonated in the minds of agrarian societies of the 10th and 11th century. This was the basis of their economy, the milk-giving cattle. So yes, this is a reference to a well-known fairy tale that I grew up watching as a child. So to conclude, there is no doubt that the Western Slavs had their own unique animal style or even styles in different parts of the Slavic world. And I think we are only at the very initial stages now to really embrace this and recognize this. The emergence and the existence of these animal styles has also become possible through the process of decolonizing the Slavic world. For many years, you know this very well from historiography, research history. The Slavs, in comparison to Scandinavians, were sort of seen as inferior or less cultured, less capable of making beautiful things or having sophisticated ideas. We are now beginning to revise this image and see Scandinavian art and Scandinavian peoples on par with the Slavs, and to recognize these relations between the two cultures as very symmetrical. There's no reason why the Slavs could not have had their own animal style, in other words. As you could see, this style differed considerably from Scandinavian styles and should no longer be confused with them. And indeed, some of the items that I presented have been, over the course of time, interpreted as stemming from Scandinavia, wrongly. The style, as you could see, has its own visual grammar, which presumably communicated pre-Christian ideas, or perhaps in some instances, a flux of ideas from pagan and other religions. And I believe that some of those meanings can be deciphered. We have to be very careful in doing that, but I think that it is possible to some extent. But before we do that, I believe that it's imperative to revisit and republish the corpus of old finds. Many of them have not been published to a standard allowing these elaborate interpretations to be put forward. Old drawings often don't suffice. We have to actually go and see some of these objects with our own eyes, take good photographs, maybe make 3D scans to really embrace their complexity, the nuances that they display. New finds also should be systematically published, and unfortunately, this is not always the case. I'm familiar with a lot of objects from museum archives that to this day have not seen the light or publication. I believe that there is tremendous potential in legal, and I will stress this, legal metal detecting endeavors in collaboration with museums and with professionals. This is what's been recently going on in Ostrów Lednicki, and I just showed you one find, but there are more of these zoomorphic finds that have come up, and I'm sure more will come up in the next couple of years. And I believe that in the next 10 years or so, our archaeological picture, not only of Western Slavic art or Western Slavic animal style, will dramatically change, but I believe that through this art, we will gain new insights into the mindsets of these people. And as Jiří said, for the last almost 20 years or so, I've been working with Viking Scandinavian material, and I could see how the archaeological landscape over the last 10 years or so has changed, especially in Denmark, through metal detecting. There have been discoveries of objects that to earlier generations of scholars had been totally unknown, and now we have hundreds of them. Having worked at the National Museum of Denmark, I can tell you that each year the museum receives around 30,000 metal objects from metal detecting alone. I'm sure that there's a lot to be found in the soil in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, through metal detecting, if it is done in a professional way in collaboration with amateurs and archaeologists. So I think there is a lot of hope, or new hope, for Slavic paganism, especially through metal detecting finds. And I will end here. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Leszek, for such a positive conclusion. Yeah. And I believe we have time for maybe 2 questions. Okay. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leszek, for really interesting overview on the really new motifs and things. But honestly, I would be a bit skeptical about if we really can call it a style, because what I have seen on your presentation, there are for sure quite numerous animistic motifs from one region, but honestly, I don't know what was the origin of these things. So it could come from several different cultural and zones, yeah. And I think, for instance, what we know with Nadia Profantova quite good, we can by us identify the types of kaptorgas with very rich motifs of interwired animals and so on and so on, but they are really absolutely untypical for other types of artifacts. Yeah, so I think we can talk about the animistic style of kaptorgas, but it is really confined just on these type of artifact. And if we are looking for the analogies, yeah, so which is really quite typical in the technical form, you know, and so on. I think we can find the Byzantine. There is, of course, the question: what was a medium of how it traveled these motifs from the Byzantine art to the Slavic workshops, and perhaps there are, I don't know, textiles or something like that, because if you look at the preserved textiles, they are very quite often represented these animal confronted to each other, you know, interwired and so on and so on. But afterwards, what you have shown, and I will finish, sorry, there were really separated animals as the application on other items and so on and so on. So again, in the end, to the question, do you really think that we can talk about the style as is, I don't know, an Anglo-Saxon style in England or Merovingian style, and yeah, from late 5th and beginning of 6th century?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and thank you for being so vocal about this problem of, is it a style or is it something else? What are we really looking at? And in a sense, like, I agree with you, of course, where you say that this doesn't pop out of nowhere. It has to have some origins, and it doesn't function in a vacuum. And these Byzantine motifs, as you say, they kind of shine through, at least when you see these entangled beasts, for instance, or some of the quadrupeds. But then it's not only Byzantine. This motif appears all around the world with these intertwined beasts, or you have the motif known as the master of animals, for instance, that is, again, something that recurs. But I would dare to call this a style, because even though this particular design is more sort of intercultural or with deeper roots, the other motifs are rather characteristic just for this specific area, for this specific time. And as you could see through this theory of citation, they recur on different categories of items. And what I showed you is just a selection of the material. There's much more of it. So I would dare to call it a style. I think that we are still in the very early stages of understanding it, but I would dare, following Jan Żak, who is my hero, of course, I would dare to call it a style. Cumulatively, as I said, there's more of these items than all the items in the Mamen style. So if we believe in the existence of the Mamen style, then why do we deny ourselves, the Slavs, the existence of something like this? The question, I think, is it, and I originally thought it's the Western Slavic animal style, but I'm now leaning towards the idea of styles, plural. And then maybe there is, let's say, a precedent to this, which would be the Great Moravian variant or variants. Then, let's say what we were looking at, maybe it's the Piast variant. Because it's interesting, because the same kind of artifacts, I'm leading a project now on Slavs in the north. The same kinds of artifacts that you saw here appear in Scandinavia. They pop up through metal detecting. Right now, we have, for instance, 2 copper alloy goads of these zoomorphic spurs, one from Sweden, there's another one from Denmark. There are kaptorgas with these creatures. There's a lot of unpublished stuff as well. And, you know, the Piast and Harald Bluetooth Svein Forkbeard connection was rather strong. So it all makes sense if you weave a bigger picture of these processes. I would say, let's wait and see. I would say it's great that we can have conferences like this, where we can learn from each other, confront ideas, and clash, maybe. Yeah. let's be hopeful that this can lead us somewhere. Is this something new?
Very shortly, we have acceptance of Byzantine style in various centuries, and it is another. The style from 7th, 8th century is another than the Byzantine types of decoration, animal decoration, concretely from 10th century.
Yeah.
Yes, the same impulse are made in some style, but this style is for Middle Europe in 8th century Byzantine late Avar. It is the best characteristic because it is one type of modification of this Byzantine originals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the later maybe that this old Hungarian style is another adaptation of Byzantine motif, sometimes also some from Orient, of course, from Iran, Syria. But it is another style, and also the dating.
Yeah.
But to Bohemia comes this style, and I can say now that in time, it means that in 8th century they are the same style, and we have now evidence of production in Tismice, in Hostim, in various minimalist real forts, and that's why we know that it is domestic. But after this, in the frame of the style, and sometimes after some originals, maybe from Carpathian.
Yeah, one thing that I have not done, and it would be great to maybe do this as some kind of collaborative project, or maybe another conference on the topic, to explore the origins and the influences, and maybe emphasize that these things don't exist in a vacuum. And then maybe we could tease out the motifs that are more sort of native, if you like, from those that are foreign. I think it would be really interesting. I don't personally have the capacity to delve into the Moravian material. I don't know it that well, but that's why we have these conferences to learn from each other. So I think it could be fruitful for all of us. Yeah.